My name is Simon Finch. Nearly 3 years ago, on Monday the 25th of January 2016, I was sexually assaulted and tortured by Merseyside Police after I criticised them for refusing to investigate several hate crimes which had been committed against me. In 2013, I suffered 2 life-threatening attacks within the space of 6 weeks. I was punched and threatened with a knife by 6 decent Europeans in a Southport Wetherspoons bar just for dancing, and while walking through Ormskirk town centre, I was pursued and trapped in a small cafe bar by 15 to 20 people threatening to beat me to death. In both cases, the police refused to attend, investigate or classify the attacks as hate crimes, saying you can't report a homophobic hate crime if you're not gay. They also trivialised the knife threat, saying that it wasn't serious enough to merit police attention. I am not gay and was too ashamed to discuss the crimes with friends or colleagues. I lost the ability to go out socialising, and over the next 18 months I became more and more withdrawn and frightened of being re-attacked until I could no longer leave my home, even for work. My employer's occupational health department became aware of the issue. They totally ignored my concerns of police discrimination and passed my address to Merseyside Police. When the police turned up in my home and I re-described the crimes, they again made an excuse, this time saying, you can't report a hate crime without a name. I knew this was wrong and asked, does that mean that Stephen Lawrence wasn't killed by hate crime because he was killed by strangers, so he wouldn't be able to give you a name either? They became hostile and refused to reply. Instead, they called in a Merseycare NHS Trust mental health worker and ordered him to classify me as a vulnerable adult, despite my protest that these officers were discriminating against me and weren't applying the law. I was taken to Copulane Police Station in Bootle. I'd been getting ready for bed when the police officers turned up and was dressed only in a t-shirt and long johns, despite offering no resistance. That also placed me in handcuffs. On entering the station, the officers who were leading brutally yanked forwards on the handcuffs, forcing me to my knees. They then dragged me along the floor by the wrists, forcing my long johns down until I was entirely naked from the waist down. I was then dragged around Copulane reception, naked, in front of around 10 members of the public. They were so brutal that I still had bruises on my wrist more than a week later. There were around 10 officers behind reception, but none of them intervened or even looked surprised at the abuse. I was then dragged over to the duty officer on reception and processed while naked and with no ability to cover myself. At her first question, I said, I need to use the toilet. She refused, so I defecated on the station floor in front of around 25 people. I was then forced to strip naked before being detained naked overnight with no clothing and no bedding. It was so cold that it was impossible to lie down on the plastic mattress. I had to spend the night crouched in a corner with my knees drawn up against my chest for warmth. At no point was I offered the chance to speak to a solicitor or even a hot drink. Next morning I was told to dress before the Merseycare NHS Trust social worker arrived. She entered the room shouting, "How could you do that?" by which she meant defecate, and made it clear that I was an object of disgust from the start. She never once asked if I'd been mistreated, and given how angry the police were, I'd say she had a responsibility to do that. Due to her open hostility, and partly due to this all taking place in Copulane, I didn't feel safe to explain what had happened. The social worker then took me for an extremely hostile mental health assessment, in which I was again given no fair chance to explain what had happened. I was sectioned, despite being in highly sensitive and classified full-time work for the majority of my life. I was detained at the Merseycare Trust Health Centre facility in Southport. During my admission, I attempted to raise the abuse several times with care staff, but all were dismissive of my request for help. In my first weekly assessment with the psychiatrist Wessam, I again stated that I'd been seriously abused by the police in custody. He openly mocked me, saying these things don't happen in this country, and encouraged the entire room of around 10 people to laugh at me. I can't even begin to explain the psychological damage inflicted by this response. You want to scream and shout or throw something, but I assume that's what they wanted. They'd have had me in a straitjacket in seconds. So I suppressed the abuse and was only able to talk about it more than a year later. A few weeks after that, I was formally charged with a mock offence by one of the officers who tortured me. I was still haunted by the abuse and unable to face a court trial, and requested a medical report detailing the effects of the hate crimes and abuse. The psychiatrist Wessam delivered a report which branded me a liar over the hate crime attacks which I've subsequently proven. I was then convicted of an offence which typically all other first-time offenders walk away from with a caution. This conviction has taken my career and profession away from me for the remainder of my life, because I can never again hold the required security clearance. After regaining my health, I submitted a police complaint over the hate crime failures and the police abuse. Lancashire Professional Standards very thoroughly investigated the Ormskirk attack and have proven it. The response from Merseyside has been entirely the opposite. They repeatedly refused to discuss why the complaint had not been referred to the IPCC. They still refused to investigate the hate crimes, ignoring the very same reason for lateness which Lancashire had accepted. They refused to record the most serious abuse allegations and significantly downgraded others. They refused to identify the duty officer at Copy Lane, saying they had no record of who was on duty at a major station. They stated that they intended to reject the complaint on time grounds, totally ignoring the many reasons for lateness which I'd supplied. They refused to accept a first-class signed-for letter containing my response to their intention to reject the complaint. Instead, they accepted an email I'd addressed to the IPCC about concerns of victimisation once I'd realised that Merseyside weren't going to treat it fairly. Merseyside Professional Standards then said that the complaint was closed, failing to give me the full 29 days to respond. I appealed to the IPCC for a complaint rejected on time grounds. There are two ways to appeal, each with separate forms. Firstly, you can appeal that the time grounds decision was wrong and give further reasons for why the complaint was late. Secondly, you can appeal that the substance of the allegations is so significant that the time limit should be waived. I obviously selected the second option and argued that the unprofessional behaviour and obstruction to the complaint that I'd witnessed from Merseyside Professional Standards was because they knew their officers were guilty of very serious crimes and were trying to derail the complaint process. The IPCC's response was absolutely disgusting. They said that they were only assessing my appeal on time grounds, despite the fact that I'd selected the other option. The entire response from the IPCC and Merseyside Professional Standards has been little more than a series of dirty tricks designed to derail the police complaints process and to conceal abusive and unlawful behaviour by Merseyside officers. The IPCC repeatedly ignored their own guidelines on complaint referral and denied ownership of the complaints process. They don't think that police torture of vulnerable adults is an issue of public concern, nor do they think that police torture of victims of discrimination or hate crimes is an issue of public concern. As for Merseycare Trust, initially I believed that the misconduct, negligence and lack of duty of care that I experienced was due to bad luck and a poor relationship with the psychiatrist Wessam. After I began to complain and discuss this with support helplines, then I was told by LGBT Foundation that there is often a depressing collusion between police and mental health services, and they'd had other reports of poor services from Merseyside. I now believe I was a victim of this collusion. Merseycare Trust are colluding with Merseyside Police to inflict horrific suffering on victims of police discrimination and police brutality. The social worker who entered the room shouting at me and the psychiatrist who encouraged a room full of staff to laugh at me were most likely aware that I'd been sexually assaulted and tortured. Their responses were designed to inflict further psychological damage and prevent me from reporting the abuse. This is a system involving multiple public services with the explicit aim of destroying people, and I can't walk away from what they are doing. I've attempted to get help, advice, support, legal advice, and because I was classified as a vulnerable adult as part of this, I've been refused support, advice again and again and again, despite the fact that Justice released a report last November 2017, saying that the police were misusing the Mental Health Act to classify people as vulnerable adults to prevent them getting legal advice. Nobody seems to have done anything about this. Basically, if the police want to destroy you, they can do it very easily by classifying you as a vulnerable adult, sexually assaulting and torturing you, handing you over to Merseycare Trust, who will then compound the abuse, and you'll basically lose any possibility of taking action under the UK Human Rights Act for Article 3 violations. That's inhuman and degrading treatment, which is what I suffered, a type of torture. You can only take action for a year under the UK Human Rights Act, and I think that the mockery that I received in hospital was basically designed to prevent me from taking action under the UK Human Rights Act. It's an established fact that the UK police often deny hate crimes. It's also an established fact that UK police are misusing the Mental Health Act to deny people access to the law. I've tried contacting my union, I've tried contacting the media, I've tried contacting law firms time and time again, but they just can't put these facts together and consider where they might lead. Time and time again, I've been refused advice, support, or legal representation, and each time the unspoken implication is, you're lying because you were classified as a vulnerable adult. It's absolutely disgusting. I've been suffering quite horrific post-traumatic shock, again, which I can't get treatment for. This has totally destroyed me. They've totally destroyed any mental well-being that I once had. They've taken my career away from me for the remainder of my life. Really, I've got nothing else to do except stand up against this abuse. I can't even begin to tell you what it's like to be dragged around a police station naked. The adrenaline just wouldn't stop firing. I mean, you know, when you realise that they're actually dragging you around a police station naked, one of the first things that I thought is, this is all going to be on CCTV. If they're going to do this to me, then they surely must suspect that they're going to lose the jobs, and I thought they're going to anally rape me with truncheons or even kill me. I mean, you know, just shock after shock after shock hits you. The time in the Merseycare Trust facilities as well, despite the mockery of the human rights violations I'd suffered, they also allowed several really disturbed subnormal patients to repeatedly threaten me for being gay. I received regular death threats. I was trapped in just 3 or 4 quite small rooms on a closed ward. It's absolutely horrific what they are doing to people. I hope that you'll read the rest of the materials I've submitted. There's an IPCC complaint, a PHSO complaint. As for me, this has really destroyed the life that I had. Thank you for listening.